Good evening. It is time for the Sunday edition of the Iman Report. It is Sunday, March 7th. If you Tonight we are previewing the AL West, where it could be a three-team race to the division title. And we'll get to the signing that get to the signing in a moment that made me change my projections. But if you like what you see, please give this channel a like and please be kind and hit that subscribe button. But yes, baseball's fast approaching, and Houston makes a great signing by signing Jake Odorizzi to a 2-year contract at Jake Odorizzi signs a 2-year contract at 2 years at 17 a year, so 35 million is what Odorizzi's getting paid for this contract, and this was a good signing by the Astros. He will definitely fit in this rotation that does need help. Now it definitely puts a lot of weight off of the shoulders of Zach Greinke and Lance McCullers Jr., and it will really help out once Justin Verlander returns from the disabled list. But let's start where I usually start, dead last. That's going to be the Seattle Mariners this year. Seattle rebuilding, looking to change the culture in Seattle. Trader Jerry tearing this team down to the bolts. They do bring back a familiar face in Seattle with James Paxton, who is trying to revive his career and probably going to get flipped at the trade deadline if all things go well. You still got Kyle Seager. We'll see if he sticks around or not. You still got Mitch Haniger, who could potentially who could be flipped. Of course, you got J.P. Crawford, Ty France, Dylan Moore, Tom Murphy, Jake Fraley. And then your bench is Luis Torrens, Shed Long, and Braden Bishop. And yeah, James Paxton, part of that rotation. You've got Marco Gonzalez, who could end up being the ace this year. You've got Yusei Kikuchi. You've got Justice Sheffield, who could be on the back end of the rotation. You got Chris Flexen trying to fight for one of the final spots in the rotation. You got Justin Dunn. Flexen is, I think, more likely to end up pitching out of the bullpen when all is said and done. Your closer, Rafael Montero. So yeah, you'd probably put Justin Dunn and Nick Margevicius in the long relief role. Will Vest, Kenyon Middleton, Casey Sadler, Anthony Misowitz. And on injury list right now, you got Andres Munoz, and who will likely be the closer when he returns from injury, Ken Giles, trying to revive himself. Who could be up with Seattle? You could have Cal Raleigh. Jose Marmolejos, definitely a guy who could get an opportunity at some point. Sam Haggerty, Donovan Walton could be up with the Mariners at some point. Trevor Trammell. And as in terms of pitching, they're looking at L.J. Newsome and Eric Swanson could be guys that could potentially crack the rotation later this year once the Mariners do sell off. Seattle is pretty much rebuilding. It's going to be a long year. I think their ceiling is probably 70 wins. Floor might be close to 55. But I think they'll probably win around 64, 65 games this year. They'll finish in dead last. But with an eye on the future, maybe James Paxton shines. They get more prospects. So we'll see how a return to Seattle does for James Paxton. But don't expect any miracles from this team. They're going to finish in the basement. In fourth place, we might not finish too far above Seattle is the Texas Rangers. Texas in a bit of a rebuild. And they certainly got a very young and green lineup in Arlington this year. So this will be a fun group of kids. As we'll see if it'll get interesting to see if Arlington actually brings back full capacity ballparks. It could probably be more like 50% capacity, but I do think with Texas loosening the restrictions like they are, we could see more fans at opening day in Arlington than some of the other ballparks. But you still got Joey Gallo, Nick Solak is somebody to watch, Nate Lowe, David Dahl, Jose Dravino, Isaiah Kinner Falefa, and Ledoy Tavares. So a lot of young faces coming off the bench. You get Chris Davis from the Oakland A's, who will probably switch off with Willie Calhoun as the DH. Chris Davis had a bit of a regression in Oakland last year, now in Texas. Elvis Andrus goes to Oakland. Delino DeShields Jr., non-roster invite, looking to crack the roster. And you got Charlie Culberson. A rotation of who's who. No real ace. You got maybe a rehabilitation project in Mike Foltynewicz, who fell on hard times last year in Atlanta and Houston. Dane Dunning, who bounces around. Jordan Lyles. Kyle Gibson, a journeyman. Gibson, but expect probably a lot of innings to be tasked to the bullpen this year with this rotation. This rotation's not going to get you a lot of innings. So it's going to be guys like Wes Benjamin, who will be probably used a lot, Brent DeGoose, Taylor Hearn, Jonathan Hernandez, your closer, Jose Leclerc. Brock Burke, the only guy who's on the injured list as of right now, but Texas will certainly be looking at their farm system later this year. Sam Huff could be up. You could have David Garcia, Sam Huff. Roland Guzman is a guy who could be a guy to watch out for. Eli White is a guy who could be up with the show this year. But they are hoping for some guys in AAA this year that will be ready for to come up to the show later this year. You got Colby Allard in AAA. You've got Kyle Cody, Joe Palumbo, John King, and Tyler Phillips. These are all guys. And then in AA, you've got Gary Rodriguez and AJ Alexi. There is certainly plenty of opportunities for these youngsters in AAA this year to get a look in the starting rotation with how bad the starting rotation looks for the Texas Rangers this year. A lot of these guys are not going to get you a lot of innings. And you get Joe Gatto and DeMarcus Evans. Oh, wow. Former Giant Nick Vincent looking to revive his career. Matt Bush. Some rehabilitation projects in the minors. But this is a Texas team that is pretty much tanking. Floor, they win 60, 65 and finish last. Ceiling, 75 games. I think they're going to win closer to 72, 73 wins this year. But this year it's going to be about the rebuild. It's going to be about getting the youngsters some at-bats. So I don't expect a whole lot of miracles out of the Texas Rangers this year. Now it is on to the three teams who could win first place, who could win the West. It could be a three-horse race in the AL West. Originally, I was going to have Houston slotted third until they got Odorizzi. Now, who I've got third is I think it's probably going to be the Oakland A's. There are some question marks regarding the Oakland A's this year. They lose Chris Davis. They lose Mark Semien. They do get Elvis Andrus, who's a good shortstop. But they lose also Liam Hendriks, so that could be losing some of these guys to the bullpen is really what's going to sting. They lose Jake Lamb, TJ McFarland. Joakim Soria no longer here. They do bring back, though, Mike Fiers, Mike Minor going to Kansas City. They lose Tommy LaStella to the Cross Bay rival Giants. You still got Ramon Laureano, who definitely has some pop in his bat. Mark Canha has some pop. Matt Chapman has some pop. Matt Olson has some pop. So, maybe... And Tony Kemp, we'll see if he can hold on to that second base job this year. You still got Chad Pinder. And former Giant Aramis Garcia now likely going to be the backup catcher for the Oakland A's this year. The rotation, can Chris Bassett repeat what his great stuff from last year? You still got Jesus Luzardo. Jesus Luzardo is the guy that could make or break the Oakland A's this year. If Luzardo can rattle off some wins and be a guy who could potentially be an ace. Frankie Montas fell back to earth last year. We'll see if Montas could get it back together. Sean Manaea, another guy who had a down year. Manaea probably tasked with, we'll see if Manaea could get back into ace form. And rounding, you got Mike Fiers. And then, of course, down a guy who's looking to crack the rotation. This could be his last chance, is AJ Puk. And AJ Puk has struggled at this point to try to crack the rotation. So Puk is a guy who could also pitch out of the bullpen too, if at worst. You still have Jake Diekman, who could likely close this year. You got former Giant Sergio Romo, Lou Trevino, JB Wendelken, Yosmero Petit, Nick Turley, Adam Kolarek, Danny Jimenez. Oakland, at worst, Oakland regresses a bit and falls to third. At best, they are a wild card or they win the AL West outright. Their floor will probably be around 81 wins. Their ceiling could be 95. I kind of got them around 85 to 87 wins this year. It is going to be a lot more difficult with Houston and the LA Angels getting better this year, so Oakland's really going to have to earn it this year if they want to win the AL West. In second place, the revamped Los Angeles Angels. The Angels really did a good job this offseason revamping their starting pitching. They bring in Dylan Bundy. They bring in Jose Quintana. These are definitely two guys where I think their stuff will work a lot better at pitcher-friendly Angel Stadium. They do lose Andrelton Simmons, Matt Andriese, Cam Bedrosian. But they do lose a lot of dead weight, which is great. But for Trout, you now got a pitching staff that's going to get you some wins. You do bring in Dexter Fowler, Jose Iglesias, Max Stassi, your catcher this year. Suzuki coming off the bench. And yes, this is the final year of that of Albert Pujols' long contract. So Pujols is likely gone after this year, and then Franklin Barreto coming off the bench. But you do have a decent rotation this year. You do have Andrew Heaney, Dylan Bundy, a guy who I think could. Alex Cobb, this is another, I think, good buy low situation. Cobb could be a guy where I think his stuff could really translate well at Angel Stadium. You do have Jose Quintana, who fell on hard times a bit with the Cubs, but I do think Quintana's ground ball pitching will work much better at Angel Stadium. You do have Griffin Canning, a guy who could likely crack the back end of that rotation. Closing the flame-throwing Raisel Iglesias. You bring in Mike Myers, Alex Claudio, Felix Pena, so they do bolster that bullpen a bit. Maybe Anthony Bamboon comes up with the Angels at some point this year. Maybe Joe Adell, maybe Brandon Marsh, Taylor Ward, all guys that could be up with the Angels at some point later this year. In the minors, you do have Patrick Sandoval, Jose Suarez, Hector Yan, all guys to watch in AAA this year. But also the pressure is on Joe Maddon to win this year. And the pressure is on Joe Maddon to finally get Mike Trout to the postseason. I do think Joe Maddon is on the hot seat in Orange County this year. Originally, I was going to have them win the West before Houston went and got Odorizzi. But I do think the Angels will compete for a wild card this year. Their ceiling could be around 95 games. Their floor, 81 games. I think they're going to win 88 games this year. Finish second, and they do. Yes, that's right. You heard it here first. Mike Trout will finally see the postseason this year. So that's where I've got the Angels. And your first place team, the Houston Astros. Yes, the Astros made the right move by bringing in Jake Odorizzi. That really bolsters the Astros rotation. This is also the last year, I think, of Carlos Correa's contract. So this is the last go they got before Carlos Correa likely heads to another team. A lot of this young core is getting very close to being paid at this point. They do lose George Springer. They do lose Chris Davinsky and Joe Biagini. But they still got Altuve. And the Bregman nearing a big payday. Michael Brantley comes in. But yeah, could be the last year. Carlos Correa. Correa likely going to get paid after a new CBA gets dealt. Kyle Tucker, this is make or break for Kyle Tucker. Can Kyle Tucker finally have the pop that he's shown in the minors? Miles Straw, another guy that could a young guy that could bring in some pop. You got Aldemus Diaz, Abraham Toro coming off the bench. But the rotation looks much better with Zach Greinke, Lance McCullers, Jake Odorizzi. And then Jose Urquidy could be either starting or pitching as an opener. Christian Javier looking to crack the rotation. And unfortunately, it looks like Framber Valdez is now going to be on the injured list. You got Josh James on the injured list, Austin Pruitt. But Garrett Stubbs, can he finally get up to the show this year? And let's see if Freudis Nova could make the jump this year. But there is definitely opportunities for now a guy like Luis Garcia, Brandon Belak, Tyler Ivey, and Nivaldo Rodriguez to try to earn an impression in spring training to try to fill in that either a starter or the opener role with Framber Valdez now hurt. But Urquidy could be a guy that could be serviceable. Christian Javier could be serviceable. And then at some point later in the year, you do get back Justin Verlander. And if all works out for Verlander, Verlander could be that guy that could definitely give the Astros a push towards the later part of the year. They do get back Francis Martis. They get back Kent Emanuel. But all in all, I think this is maybe the last hurrah for Houston before they do lose Carlos Correa to free agency. I do think their floor, though, could be 81, 82 wins. Their ceiling could be 100 wins. I think they'll win about 95 games. Houston does win the West thanks to Jake Odorizzi. They get Verlander back for the push. And Houston makes one last run for a World Series. And that's what I've got this year for the AL West. Next week, we preview the stacked NL East. Everybody have a good week. I will stay awesome and